on purpose, is to take music and change it from the healing vibrational frequency of 432 to 440. So our music, you can take music and put it back in 432, but if you listen to the classics like Mozart and that is a healing frequency. When I was getting my health degree way back in, I went to college in 93.
It's not that old.
We went to the Senior Citizen Center and we put on a blood pressure cuff, and we measured their blood pressure with different music. And it was astounding to see the difference between classical music and hard rock. Their blood pressure. We were just doing some little geriatric studies of that and not understanding, and I didn't understand frequency back then, music frequency. So they purposely are trying to create and take art and uglify it, right? Instead of God's creation. And so, they're pulling down beautiful artwork in states, and then they're putting up, in New Orleans now they have a naked monster with full everything, with horns, and you're like, what? Why are they doing that? And then just the type of poetry or books that are, that's why for the strength of youth with our kids, we tried to say that good music, good books, good poetry, and so we can take those, and we want to capture the sunshine. And what is the sunshine? It's Jesus Christ. So everything that we're talking about is about Jesus Christ. Yes, Nancy?
Our government has also allowed UNESCO, which is an international group, to come and give the Native Americans demand that everything be taken out of our museums and given back to them. So I'm really grateful we got to film a lot of.
Yeah, that is what I just barely learned on my trip, is that and why UNESCO? So now you go to these sites, and they used to keep them really beautiful. So we went and saw the snake mound, and they wouldn't let us climb up on so we couldn't tell what it was. They won't mow it. They won't, and they are trying to take artifacts and hide them. So Lake Powell was named after William Powell, and his progenitors were the ones with the Smithsonian. And so what we found out was that during Joseph Smith's time in the town of Palmyra, there were 2 Methodist preachers, and those sons are the ones that the Smithsonian owner was
E.B.
him.
Squires and William Powell.
Yeah, E.B. Squires. And so they are hiding all the Native
they
American
are.
stuff.
Yep.
But it's even worse now, because at least, like what Nancy said, they were able to film and see some things. So one of the places that we went, we were able to see some things still. But like when the last day I went to the Cincinnati Museum, and I asked them, where is the Native American stuff? And she's like, oh, well, and I said, but I go, do you realize you're racing? I go, my husband's side of the family married into the Cherokee Indian, and he was a redhead from Ireland, and he lived on a reservation with her. Her last name was White, and but in a lot of Native American stories, so that's why I was trying to tell you about this one. A lot of Native American stories too, these giant redheads were cannibals. Were eating him. So when he comes and marries her, and he's a redhead and lives there, he had some baggage he didn't know he had, and they had a little boy, and then he got murdered on a reservation. And I said, but I'm sad. I would like to see, Native American history. It seems like in the name of so one of the places we went to, Fort something, I can't remember what it was called, but by UNESCO, if you change it to this is all ceremonial, we can hide it all. We can take it out. Yeah. Fort Ancient. That's what it's called. Fort Ancient, and it's a fort. It's not ceremonial. It's a fort, and it aligns with what happens in the Book of Mormon. But after I came home, I did buy this book, He Walked the Americas, and I asked Brock about she was born in 1897. Her name is Lucy Taylor Hanson, and she's collected all the stories, even it goes back and uses a lot of Egyptian, right? But all the stories from North America, Central America, South America, of this prophet that walked and healed. And so I believe, and she'll say, oh, this is a story from Mexico, this is a story from Peru, this is a story from New Zealand, this is a story from Missouri, this is a story from Virginia, and she's collected these that actually kind of prove
that the Savior came to all those Indians,
and
right?
she's proving the Book of Mormon to be true. And so I was like devouring this when I got home, because after seeing just one, we only spent like 2 days at the mounds, or a day and a half of the mounds. But so, I mean, the Native Americans and us, when you have good culture, you're looking at the beauty of God's nature. And we find those scriptures in the Book of Mormon where it says that all things denote that there's a God, right? And we go outside and we can, if we're too much in our homes a lot, and it's summer now, we should go out and hike and see these beautiful things, right? And so we can feel the God's majesty and also just ground, right? And we understand now electromagnetism. We did go to several sites that they had an ancient American Stonehenge. It was so wow to see the alignments that they did, and to see a cave system where there was a sage, but there was a sacrificial table. And so you're like, are they practicing the Mosaic law, or are they killing people? You don't know, right?
Or when did they change?
Yeah, when did they
what happened,
change?
right?
And yeah, so one of the stories that was interesting in here is that Christ shows up, or this prophet shows up, and when these two warring Indian nations are warring, and stops them, and he walks on water off the ship. So they know he's not normal, and stops them and teaches them the gospel of peace and love and kindness. And, you know, it's just, anyway, it just gives me goosebumps. It's just like, but I felt like they were erasing everything. And that's what's happening is and because UNESCO now owns these sites, it is a world and global thing. So it's kind of sad. And so, okay, so it was fun to just start off, and I'm just to remind you that I used the cottage meeting from momsforamerica.us, and then the Forgotten American Stories. So those are the two main books that I take things from, and the 5,000-Year Leap, which is a miracle that changed the world. And so, okay, so it's Cleon Skousen. He extracted the 28 principles from the Federalist Papers, and they had to write those so that people can understand the new Constitution and then our Constitution, right? And so he's extracted these 28 principles that do transcend parties and politics. And if we learn more, that's why we're doing one principle every week. And when I teach that class, I just want to show you what God gave me, and the reason why I do it this way. So I do, what is the principle, why the principle was important to the founders, why the principle, how do we practice this principle today, applications in action today, and then signs of success of the principle, like only a moral and religious people can maintain a republic. Are there signs of success of that, or are there signs of failure right now in that? And then affirmations on that principle, and then a family challenge so that the family can put it in their lives. And then we just have a final thought. So I've just broken it down in more simple way to be able to teach it on Thursday nights. And so these three pillars do begin in our home, and that is faith, virtue, and patriotism. And I think they were created by our founding fathers, and we had to nurture them in the home. And we see our founding mothers were on board. They were readers. They taught them through the Bible too about these things. And so,
You know, they were lucky. They didn't have all the distractions of TV and cell phones and the radio.
TikTok
I mean, they had books.
Yeah, they had books.
Yeah.
And then they had
The town square.
The town
and-
square to talk, and people weren't afraid to talk
Yeah.
because they understood their sovereignty, that God gave them their rights, and they weren't under the thumb of a church for the whole state or the country, right?
Yeah.
And so remember with 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. So we know that the Hebrew meaning of the word repent means to turn around. So we need to turn around. We need to repent. And also when we try to take patriotism out of a country, and that we have to feed the world, and that we're a new world order. You know, every country. I'll never forget Trump's first talk when he was over in Poland when he was president the first time, where he said, you know, you need to I think he was at the UN is when he said this. He said, you have to love your nation. And it reminds me of this book. That's why I brought it again, because that's why I went to this library, this Boston Athenaeum Library. But Cyrus the Great, and you can get this at kimbercurriculum.com. Yeah, kimbercurriculum.com. And because it just reminds me of this, because Cyrus was taught by his mom, and then George Washington gave him a copy of the Travels of Cyrus. And his mom gave it to George Washington, and he was taught that he had to be a truth teller. He had to be obedient to God's commandments. He had to be sovereign. Oops, sorry, you guys. He had to be a sovereign. That he had to love God and love the people he's serving, and yeah.
I was just gonna say, right down at the bottom, it has those 3 things that he
Yes.
accomplished.
Yeah. So he was a builder of an empire. He banned slavery, honored religious freedom, and wrote the first human rights charter. And so this
was Cyrus that did that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And this is 600 BC, the same
Yes.
time that Lehi and all of the crackdown on all of the priests were going on, and they were hunting them all down to consolidate power. And so we don't want to consolidate power. We want individual, freedoms. So even Stalin understood these 3 pillars of liberty. He said, America is like a healthy body, and its resistance is threefold: it's patriotism, it's morality, and it's spiritual life. So if they can attack those 3 pillars, that's why we call them the 3 pillars. And we also believe at Families for Liberty that, and I learned it from Julie Jackson, she always testifies that the gospel of Jesus Christ needs to be taught at the same time as the gospel of liberty. So wherever you're at in any of the 4 standard works, look about liberty. And really, this year especially, and I was kind of shocked going on this little trip that we went, when we got to Lexington and Concord, and hearing, oh yeah, I forgot, Paul Revere, or there were 60 writers, but we know that because of Longfellow poetry. But that started 250 years ago. So we don't have to wait till July 4th, 2026. The 250th starts now.
Yeah.
So we can start with our children talking about liberty, our grandchildren. We can this year start planning liberty trips, and testify that Jesus Christ is the great liberator. And so everything that we talk about today should be centered in Jesus Christ.
Well, education was reading, writing, and arithmetic with a Bible on your desk.
Right.
Until
Yep.
the early 1900s,
Yeah.
when Horace
And-
Mann and
Yeah.
John Dewey destroyed that.
Yeah. And that, so I still love my Steve Ciccolani, who's a preacher.
Yeah.
His book about Trump's unfinished business, he uses the 10 Commandments, and he starts with the 10th commandment because that's the Mosaic law, and he goes on down. And when he talks about adultery or fornication, he actually uses the court system, because this one court expert for this one child, it hurt him to have the Bible or to read the Bible or use that, and so they use that to pull the Bible out of our schools. This year, Texas won. It was like they got the Constitution, I think, last year, and this year the Constitution and the 10 Commandments are to be in every classroom. The 10 Commandments. So they're going
That's
back.
good.
I'm like, oh, we need to follow Texas and talk about that basic Mosaic law, because that's with our temple, right? We have the law of obedience. That's the Mosaic law. The other really fun and interesting thing is I saw more 37s, and those that know me, and in Hebrew, Yeshua is 37. And I saw that when the first day we went.
I heard you on your thing. Look, 37, 30. There's Tami and her 37s.
Well, and 17, because Jesus Christ was killed on the 14th, and then 3 days later he rose on the 17th. And 14 shows that he's the tribe of King David, because in Hebrew David's name is 14 in Gematria. And so it was interesting to go into our first day. We went into Alexandria, Virginia, and we went into George Washington's Masonic. It's like a presidential library, right? It used to be called a temple. We got to go through all the levels, and back then it wasn't taken over, right? and a Scottish Freemason was a Templar, and so to see that his statue was 17 feet testifies that George Washington understood who Jesus Christ was, right? And that the Masons back then understood that. And we even asked our tour guide with the compass and the square, which is male and female, with the G in there, what does the G stand for? And he said, well, God and geometry. because you can't create without sacred geometry. So isn't that interesting that we're talking about capture the sunshine, about poetry and music and literature, but then Common Core comes in and tries to take away our cursive writing so we can't see. It's also, cursive is good for brain development, but we can't read our founding documents.
Cleon Skousen's taught that if you do everything in cursive, you will remember it 8 times longer than if you print.
So this is part of the dumbing down of us.
Yes.
And then this to take geometry out and to the way that they teach math is so that we don't see God. And God is there.
And another reason why they take cursive away is so you can't read the founding documents that are all done in cursive.
Yes, yes.
And if they don't know how to write cursive, they're not going to read it.
Yeah, and then you won't remember why your own ancestors came to America, because you can't read their journals either.
Yeah.
Right? You can't do your genealogy and connect with, we need to, part of saving ourselves is saving the dead, is connecting with our ancestors, right? And so it's been a war. So we have the great destroyer of liberty, Satan, and then we have Jesus Christ, the great liberator. And so so this is okay. So John Adams had in mind a different ideal. Okay, all right. So I first wanted to say, so we're calling upon you guys to help build these pillars of faith, virtue, and patriotism, and shore them up on our home front. Shore them up every time you have your grandchildren. And we can have discussions and we can tell stories. Remember we talked about America Tell the Story? So that we can tell these stories heart to heart, and we'll have so many reasons that we love this land. And if we don't really try to teach this gospel of liberty and the true stories of the providence of God watching over this country and creating the Constitution, Declaration, all these things, then we will not understand, we won't keep our liberty, right? We won't keep our liberty. So John Adams also had this in mind, and he had a different ideal. He said, I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. And back then, philo means love, and Sophi means wisdom. The love of wisdom. They've taken that and now they've changed that and made it super opposite, like they do. Jesus does everything. So that's why I love my Second Nephi two oppositional things. It's so much better, the story of Adam and Eve, and what things happened with the fall.
I just listened to Dershowitz talking about Harvard, which was the pinnacle divinity school
Yes.
to learn of God.
Back then.
And how it's been totally flipped to be the anti-divine.
Right.
You know?
Oh, I love that.
How the mighty have fallen.
So that's why this lesson I think is important, is we have to be aware of those flips in all our systems of music, poetry, taking math and science and changing it, and then now we have the Bean Museum with evolution, with that we're taking all of these things and attacking the core units of the family and the genderizing.
Creation.
So last time I got in trouble and all of Nancy's videos got pulled down, and I still think
I finally got.
but no, all her videos were taken down when she used to be able to stream from Venmo, and she let me do Capture the Sunshine, and last time I showed a video of
Don't say it. I cause a problem.
well, the Italian minister, and she just testified that she was being erased. So I'm just saying that she was being erased, that she could no longer, she was called a parent, she couldn't be a mother, a grandmother, a sister, a Christian, and that, everything was being erased. And that's what Satan wants to do.
Yes.
He wants to erase our identity. That's what Mao did after he was taught by Stalin. And it was to go in there and erase culture, erase faith, erase,
To demoralize.
Yeah,
to take
demoralize.
the morals away.
Yeah.
Isn't she going to prison now? Like they tried to twist everything.
No, I didn't hear that.
Okay.
I don't know.
there's
I
one.
haven't heard, because she was just recently in Trump's office, and she's still
Maybe
speaking.
It's the
No,
French.
no, it's not her, because General Flynn, I follow on True Social. I'm Tami Liberty. You can follow, but I love to follow just like all of Trump's cabinet members and General Flynn. And he was saying she should have been Irish. She sounds like an Irish woman because she's just fiery up there, and that's why I used her video, because she was so fiery. And then she won. And we just found out that the we have Hungary now that's free, and Poland's now free.
Nancy was censored because of just a clip.
All of her years and years and years of videos were completely, 10 years of videos were completely demolished. 2,000 videos because
that little
of
clip.
that little clip.
And that
Wow.
censored everyone. I mean,
Yeah.
that's That's
Yeah.
how bad
So
our
is
government
that,
is.
that is anti.
Was that under Obama? Back,
No,
what,
this is just
was
during
this under-
COVID.
oh, okay, this was under Biden, when they were censoring everybody. Okay.
Everything.
No, it was
Yeah.
actually, I think it was even under Trump because they were censoring him, right? And so
Oh,
we
yours were taken down during
Yeah,
Trump?
yeah, the 45, right, Trump 45, not
Oh.
Trump 47.
But you know,
So,
his hands were so tied.
yeah.
I know, he's over the deep
Yeah.
state. What
So
he's
that's
gonna do.
why I think we were led on Stop the Still on 11/14.
Yeah.
Robin and I flew in and we met Jolene and suddenly we were led to all these amazing
Was that January
things.
6th?
It was November 14th.
Oh, okay.
The Stop the Still was. And the last thing that we did, we were just led, I mean, like, Venezuelan, two twins unveiled their Venezuelan flag, and we went to talk to them, and we said, are you from here? And we're like, well, we live in Florida, but we work and send our money back 21 years ago. Hugo Chavez, this is before we heard of the Dominion, and right now there's a court case with Mike Lindell with Dominion, if you're following that.
Oh.
And she said Hugo Chavez's bodyguard gave she and her sister, they said that they just gave it to the Trump team, this manual. That's why all the elections in all these countries are being taken over, because they're using this software. But here's the manual, and we're like, what?
Yeah, we had no idea.
I know. And so God led us to this lady, and this one lady said the Philadelphia, and it was, you know, we can't make a king, and when in Philadelphia, that's where the Constitution was, right? And happened, and that, you know, Nathaniel is the one that chose who would be the leader. And so, you know, God will help choose who our leader is. And then remember when I was just trying to study Donald Trump, and I thought, we were at the Come Follow Me lesson about Benjamin being named Benno by his dying mother, son of my sorrow. She knew she was dying, and then Jacob renaming him Benjamin, the covenant right hand. And so I looked up, what does Donald mean? I said, world leader. I'm like, whoa, okay. What does John mean? His middle name, Grace by God. And I was like, okay, wow, you know, this is interesting to see. Anyway, so I love this. John Adams was bold, and he said, I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. So, are we going to be able to keep our liberties? And I think we're not fighting, I don't know, we're not fighting well enough yet in our school systems, because they keep taking things out. We were able to keep cursive writing in schools in Utah, but our math has been taken over. And these poor kids are not passing. And during COVID, you don't even to get into BYU, you don't have to have a ACT right now. And then my daughter just took an ACT class, and they're taking science out, the science portion. Well, and did you hear in San Francisco, there's no more Fs. That is, you know, that a B will be an A. And so they're purposely doing this to destroy our nation, to destroy. And so that's why we have families, the title of liberty. So look in the Book of Mormon. I mean, the title of liberty, it's the standard. Ezra Taft Benson's book, he has written so many about the Constitution and liberty, but
This
This
nation
this
shall
nation
endure.
shall endure. So I was
I'm doing a PowerPoint on that.
Oh, yay.
Tami.
Yeah.
I just got back from Japan, and their kids go to school 6 days a week. They go from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m.
Ugh.
Education is so important to the Japanese.
Yeah.
They just want their kids to be smarter, and
Yeah.
what are we doing to ours?
Well,
I mean, that's too much.
Yeah, no, I served my
That's too
mission in
much, but
Japan,
then we're too
and-
little.
And I'll tell you, they've been infiltrated by the same thing that Common Core did. So what they've done is, for them, your high school and exit exam is how will determine your path of your life. So that's why the parents invest so much extra money and buy their kid at 2-year-old a desk for them to study. And then, but their scores are being manipulated, because I think China has invaded, and they didn't want Japan to propagate. And so the women want to be stay-at-home moms. They don't want to go to college. They didn't want to. They didn't, just like what they're doing here. The STEM, the women, they're pushing, even our church is pushing that women should go back to school to get their degree. What for? What are you doing? You know, I mean, it bothers me. It really, really bothers me that we're pushing women out of the home, and then that
I haven't heard the
destroys.
church doing
The
that.
church, yeah, they
I
are.
think education is important, but still within the church, like 50%
Yeah.
of the women are single, so it's necessary in a lot of cases.
That is true. So so I believe that every woman should have an education because they are single, and we have to be able to support ourselves and to leave a husband that's abusive. They need to have
Or a spouse that passes away.
or a spouse that passes
Yeah.
away. Yes, but anyway, so with Japan, back to Japan, they were passing women and not passing the men. So what do the men do? It's an insult to their pride there, and so then they become gamblers and they do play pachinko, and then they don't get married because they're embarrassed that they can only work at a gas station, or and so it just becomes the women they're miserable. The women are working and they're miserable because they want to be married, and so they just shook things up. And I feel like that's what's happened is because of divorces, right? We're shaking things up. Satan wants us divorced. We don't want us.
Yeah.
He wants families to be destroyed. And so anyway, so we've got to fight against that. So this book, Raising a Generation of Patriots, there's a chapter about making good use of the harvest. So free people have been blessed with prosperity, but it seems materialism has taken over our garden of liberty, and with it is accompanying companions of greed and corruption. That's what's going on, right? So the culminating event of the year's hard labor seems to be the big after Thanksgiving Christmas sell, right?
Black
and even our
Friday.
education system seems to be focused on making a living, which is good, but we've got to have this balance, right? We need to have this balance with God, and we need to put God back in, right? And so it's a good step for those 10 Commandments.
Can you just repeat? Materialism has taken over our garden of what?
Our Garden of Liberty. So this little teeny book, I have them in my car if anybody wants one. They're
Is that the Raising a Generation?
Yes, it's just a teeny little book, and I'm willing to give you those. I have lots of them, and it just talks about how to grow liberty, how to weed that garden, and so that's why I think Julian always says the gospel of Jesus Christ has to be taught at the same time as the gospel of liberty, because we have to do a lot of weeding, because there's so much Satan is working so overtime, especially in these last days. So I thought I wanted to go back to my daughter getting her patriarchal blessing, and remember my 37, and I show up, and the first thing he asks my daughter is open up to Alma 37, and I'm like, what is God still trying to teach me with this? Jesus 37. And he asked her to read it, and it's about the Liahona, and it says the Hebrew definition of Liahona is a compass, right? And he said, take that word away and put your patriarchal blessing in there to be the compass of your life. What I've noticed in my 5 kids is that my year 2000 kids, and then 2004, 2009, remember I had 10 miscarriages, but their patriarchal blessing started saying this is the last of the last days. And then I started noticing that they really listed their strengths and their gifts, and that they would have to use these gifts because the Savior's coming, right? Mm-hmm.
I think what we are forgetting is that the spirits that are coming down,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They're unique in every person, but our education has forgot to nurture that which is unique within each child.
Right.
So when some of these homeschooling parents are taking their kids out and they're trying to follow the passion and the interests of the child,
Yeah.
that child really blooms, right? You're
Right.
pulling out the weeds and nurturing that which is their nature.
Absolutely.
And that's what all of these systems that are just like more education, longer days, more hours. Well, AI is going to be giving you the information,
Yeah.
but what you need is going to be the creative
Mm.
part of who you are and what you're supposed to bring forth and connecting to your spirit.
Right. Right.
And that's what the patriarchal blessing is.
Yes.
Remember who you are eternally
Yes.
and manifest it here on this earth.
So beautifully well spoken. So I was watching Fox News, and Jason Chaffetz was on there, and they were talking about unschooling, and this lady was disagreeing with him, but unschooling can have a bad thing if you're not really schooling at all. But the premise of back when I was homeschooling, so I started homeschooling. My son is 30. I flew to my first homeschool convention from California to Utah because Abraham Lincoln was bisexual and a Democrat in the textbook. And I went and bought all of Cleon Skousen's stuff with the Kimber curriculum in a suitcase, and went, I'm going to have to homeschool, right, from that many years ago. And so unschooling, at first I was like, whoa, because I'm a school teacher. And I'm like, no, I need to do my math, I need to do this and that, and I did. But I had to step back and say, I'm not teaching high schoolers, I'm teaching little kids, and I had to use the spirit, and if they were interested in Indians, right? So then we would go get books about Indians. I would try to figure out math about Indians. Now I would do the sunsets and the solstices and astronomy with that. But I found field trips where my kids went out and we learned what was edible, and we gathered that and ate salad. We did how to start fires. We did how to make shelters. And I used that as you got to go do these fun things if you got this done. And we did our English, we did our reading, we did our math, we did, what science experiments can we experiment with herbs, right? Learning, and so we would take that theme of what their heart wanted to go learn, and I was you gotta learn to, and I had to change my heart.
Mm-hmm. And what you do and what's missing in our society are people that are creative problem solvers.
Mm-hmm.
They look at a situation and then they pull from all of their experience, and it's their spirit. And when we connect back to the sunshine or to Jesus Christ, and trust that there are guardian angels, there are people that want to help you and assist you from the other side to fill the measure of your creation.
Yes. What's your purpose?
Boy, we've lost that entirely, and that's, I think, where we will eventually go back into in a millennial type society.
Yeah.
But it might be only these little pockets of those that are waking up to the toxic wasteland that we are trying to educate our children in,
it's a toxic
immoral.
wasteland. It's
I think that fixes a lot of the behavioral problems in the ADHD, because the kids are learning what inspires their mind and gives them that dopamine
Yes.
and sets them on fire, instead of being told to focus on these things they don't care about, and it doesn't feed anything.
And they're like,
that's
why is this
innately
math,
interesting
or
to them.
why am I learning this, or exactly. So I do have to tell my story of my son. So my oldest son, and they had never hired a BYU students before, and I didn't have my kids. I wouldn't let him use in any social media, and then he gets to BYU. And he started public school in 8th grade when we moved to Utah, but it was every other day, and then he finished. I would go back. You can't do this now in Utah. You can't go to back to school night, talk to each of the teachers, take pictures of the USBs on the back of the books, and see if this book is good or not, right? And you can't do that. It's on Chromebook, where they can actually, our school system, UEA, still has not removed porn off the computers that these kids have. So now when my son, who's coming home from his mission this July 2nd, guys, when he went back to this last year at Lone Peak, there was no like parent-teacher conference in the library anymore. I had to trek to each of his classes, and the teachers don't care if they're showing up. They don't. I mean, it was a mess, and I was like, these COVID kids and what kind of missionaries are they going to make too, right? And so, but back to my older son's story is that he had to make a LinkedIn for his business degree at BYU. He's graduating this Saturday with his master's at Booth, which is the top 5. He wrote a vision board and said he wanted to find a job that would pay for a top 5 MBA program, and that's where he got his job. And so he did have an experience with working for Goldman Sachs, that he had to go to white Christian male is bad, and they offered him money and said, but you'll never climb, and you were born in privilege, you'll never climb the ladder. And he's like, why would I ever want to work for you? And these girls that were in the internship couldn't do what he was doing, because he grew up creative because of the way I homeschooled him. And so he goes and gets his job at it's not Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, and they're a company that did not go public. They will pay for your college education. If you can get in, right? They'll pay for if you want to get a pilot's license, they'll pay for it. And then you get dividends with their company, started in the early 1900s, and it's like an Amazon for parts. So they never hired a BYU student before, and I think they really thought he was a DEI hire because he was a cheerleader. So I think they thought, he might be gay because the gay cougar guy came out, right? So here he is. He moves to Chicago. It's 2020 during the COVID, and they forced him to move there, but then they won't let you go to work, so he had to be on his at home, sequestered. And as he's learning what's going on, because I ask questions, and it's interesting when you get your natal chart, if you ever have, from Marilyn Light. The Bible is written with questions. Jesus was a question asker, right? That's how you teach. You ask questions, right? And so that's why was the principle important to the founders, right? How do we practice this principle? And so I would always ask my kids questions to see what they're learning and see if they were listening, right? questions, and the Harvards and the, all the Yales and all of those that were hired with him, my son would be the only one asking questions, and they were off. They were done. They were done with the
On their
presentation
Zoom
every day
meetings?
on their Zoom meetings. What happened with my son is he climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed the ladder and became the manager over a whole, just quickly, because they knew he could also think outside the box, that he was honest, and that he could think, because he asked questions, he could create. He was a creator. He's got this mind of that he can create, And so anyway, so don't be afraid if your kids are deciding to homeschool.
Well, because of the screens and everything that we see, and because AI polarizes what people see, and they truly believe it's the truth, it's really hard to even have a conversation because there is no belief that anything but that can be true.
Right.
So if there's no meeting of the minds, well, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
There is none of that with my people I know, anyway.
I know. So that's why I did my own little experiment with my 5 kids, right? So my daughter, I didn't start homeschooling her from the beginning because there was, and then I found out later they were teaching, by 2nd grade, they had adopted a Common Core curriculum that told her she'd come home in May and said, I'm white, I'm bad. And this is before we knew there was anything called critical race theory. And I'm like, what? And I go to the school, she's an LDS grandmother, and her daughter was in my ward, and I was like, my daughter just said she's white and she's bad. What are you teaching? She's like, oh, this new Common Core curriculum with Edie Hirsch. And I'm like, Edie Hirsch doesn't teach that. That's my last name. I use, as grandmas, if you can find those books, it's what your kindergartner should know, what your 1st grader should know. Those are really good. They build schematas and build little bit of information on a lot of topics they're true. They're not, manipulated like what my daughter did. So that's why I took her out. But it was so much harder to homeschool her because she didn't grow up thinking mom knew everything. Right, that's what I'm saying. Because my 4 boys all started homeschooling, so they just thought mom knew it all. And so it is a lot harder to pull them out of school because they've been,
What grade did you pull her out?
2nd grade, and that was before we even knew this
She
critical race
already
theory.
had been indoctrinated.
Yes, by 2nd grade already, and I got the book. She let me take the new curriculum home, and I was shocked. There were 16 pages of Islam. Now, they're preparing for Islam to take over, for our country to fall. They are preparing. So, reading General Flynn's book, if you have time to get that one, we've got to do all we can to fight against this because we will fall. We need to pull that weed. Okay, so I wanted to talk about Sleeping Beauty. Okay, so let's consider the message of Sleeping Beauty. Beauty has gone to sleep, and when she fell asleep, the entire kingdom became lifeless and colorless. Soon noxious briars and thorns and tangled vines grew around the sleeping kingdom. Prince Philip valiantly drew his sword of truth and protected himself with the shield of virtue to make his way through the tangled mess and to fight the evil Maleficent. But that isn't what brought the kingdom back to life. The thing that brought the kingdom back to life was the love of beauty. When beauty received true love's first kiss, beauty awoke and the kingdom gloriously sprang to life. So parents, we have the privilege of teaching our children the love of beauty, and it falls on us. And this is from the actual old movie right here, and this is just a medieval drawing of
Where did you
Sleeping
get
Beauty.
what you just quoted there?
Jalene Jackson. She wrote this.
Oh, that's nice. I was just wondering,
Yeah.
was it out of a
Is it
book?
no, Jalene Jackson.
That's-
She wrote it on this
She's so
for this
Three
lesson.
founders are present because both Robin and Colette and now.
And now Jalene Jackson. Jalene, and do you remember the date she had
She
her
just sent me a
baby?
text with that on.
Yeah, I wanted to know the date. So
This is
The
Kayla
date of
Rose.
what?
Kayla Rose had her baby, and I was on my trip, and it
Oh.
was May.
Can I just, I'll tell it
Yeah,
right here?
yeah.
She goes, May 21st, 8 pounds, 1 ounce. Now remember, Julian's husband's black.
Right.
This little girl was born with red hair and blue eyes.
And
Oh
white.
my-
And her name is after Mary Magdalene.
It's Magdalene. And
Magdalene.
they
Is
said
that the
Magdalena.
cutest?
So her daughter knew that she was going to name her Magdalena, but had no idea she'd turn out and
Red
Well,
hair
is
and
her
blue
husband
eyes.
a redhead?
No.
At Julie's house.
I
she
didn't.
has
I
red.
didn't think
Julian's
so.
part of the
Yeah.
family.
Oh yes, the Beasleys. Yes, they're all redheads
Yeah.
and freckles. And
Yeah.
I grew up.
I mean, I'm looking at the baby with the red hair, and I'm like, Julene, it looks like you. What is going on here?
Oh, that's
And
hilarious.
I was like, I'm gonna hold this baby, and people are gonna wonder whose baby is
Yeah.
Right?
Because I mean, Mary Alice, not Mary Alice, but Caitlin Rose, she does look black.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
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 Absolutely.
So I have a good friend from Iceland, and Iceland's DNA are very blonde, very
Yes.
pale, and very blue-eyed, and she married a dark husband, and her first baby came out just blue-eyed, the whitest, not white, just the blondest hair, but almost white. I mean, like, and the whitest skin, and we're like, whoa! And yeah, he'd carry his baby around, and they're like, what are you doing? You know? Then the next two kids came out like him, but it was quite shocking at the very beginning, because we were like, oh boy, those genes are really strong in Iceland. You don't know how, but it's so beautiful that she actually knew, but she didn't know that Magdalena had red hair, so Jolene was able to tell her that, and that she's like, yeah, my children are listening to all my stories and all the things, the trips that she's attending, so I think that's so beautiful. So May 21st, that's beautiful.
I was listening to a podcast this morning. They said Jesus had ruddy hair.
Yeah.
So
Well,
So
I
did King
played
David.
here.
yes,
I know, I played.
that's set down his line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
David,
Yeah.
in the Bible, remember I asked my good evangelist friend, I said, where does this red hair come from? She's like, oh, and it's 1 Samuel 17 where David is fighting Goliath. I think that's where it's at, 17. And it says he was fair-skinned and ruddy. And she's like, of course that's red hair. And then
Yes.
remember, I played in my other lesson during Portugal's slides, I think it's where I found Pontius Pilate, and then the governor before that, they wrote Augustus Caesar. They had met Jesus and wrote that that's what he looked like, and that he looked way different. He emanated this light and power. No wonder when Elder Holland during conference had mentioned when they came to arrest Jesus that they had legions and they had swords and they had lanterns, because this man was a being of light, and they knew that they may have a battle on. You know?
Well,
So
doesn't he say something and they all fall down?
yeah, so they
Yeah.
asked him, are you this person who thinks you're the King of Kings? You know, and he's like, ego amo in Greek, which is I am. And so back to my 37. 37 times in the Old Testament it says I will be, and 37 times it says I am. So the New Testament testifies of Jesus Christ. Anyway, so I think it's so beautiful. Okay, so we got our Sleeping Beauty. So capture the sunshine with beautiful works of nature, art, and music, and poetry. And so, okay, so this one must have gotten, okay. Which one am I on? So I want to make sure. Okay, so we can access great works of art right in our homes that previously could only be viewed by the rich and the elite of the past. Remember, they would, the systems over in Europe, you couldn't have a quality education unless you had your private tutor or you go to your private schools, right? And then in the colonies, they had to decide whether, you know, they could afford which child would go, which was more apt to go, and things like that. And so our homes can be filled with these beautiful symphonies of music that used to be reserved for royalty, and all the exquisite and ennobling words of the poets and great thinkers and writers were merely just right now a click away, and are available to even the most humble homes. We have so many resources at our fingertips. So it's been said that when an individual or nation lacks in beauty and those qualities that we term inspirational, we become devoid of humanity, love, and self-respect. And selfishness and violence fills the void. Have we seen that?
I loved getting the Ensign because they always had beautiful
Yeah.
artwork on the cover or the
Yeah.
back page. And do you remember they used to put in, people would write music,
Yeah.
and they used to put music in there?
Yeah.
And I don't get the Leahona anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what the Leahona, I don't even know if it's pretty. But I looked at that and I immediately went to the Ensign. I went,
Oh,
that
that's
reminds me of Ensign covers.
You know,
Well-
glad it's free now.
It's free
I know
now.
it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's free now, so you can order it. So on my mission, every place that we were, so I was in Japan on my mission, every one of the places we rented had stacks and stacks of enzymes. And so I made flip charts by just cutting out these gorgeous, beautiful paintings. And this trip when we were in Palmyra, I looked up, Brock helped me find out what Palmyra meant, and it means palms or eternal life. So there were 4 big churches, they call it the Four Corners churches in Palmyra, that were there during Joseph Smith's time. But then we know there was revivals, and so there was tents that were put up from other religions and traveling people. And there was a little mound right behind one of those 4 churches, and that mound is where they buried Alvin, right? And Alvin was, well, they used mercury, right? And they said George Washington died of that as well for medicine. They used mercury. And so when I went to go see,
still putting vaccines in, don't they?
yeah. So when I go, yeah, there we go. There's the evil side. So when we went to the Grandin Press in Palmyra and listened to how, the miraculous, that place would not at first, and he even went to school with Joseph Smith, he would not print the Book of Mormon. And then he went and tried different places, and eventually he was talked into printing it. And but there was this printer that was like really fast, and it was the best printer from the ever that happened to just because the river went right by there could come in and what my 37. So we watch her and how she's printing it, and you print one page with 16 pages, and then you have to fold it, and it makes a signature. And she said, 37 signatures make a Book of Mormon. And I'm like,
No. Come on.
Jesus Christ. And my daughter's like, why is the Book of Mormon called the Book of Mormon? And I'm like, you haven't learned that yet. And they're like, it's another testament of Jesus Christ. So in that little museum was one of my enzyme pictures that I cut out way back in 1987 of the stick of Joseph and the stick of
Judah.
Guess where that is found in the Bible? You'll never forget it now, hopefully. Genesis 37. Ezekiel 37. Genesis 37 is the stick of Joseph. He's sold. It's Joseph when he's 17 gets sold into Egypt. It is Ezekiel 37 versus stick of Joseph and stick of Judah. So God is teaching us something.
He's in the numbers.
I don't know. He's teaching us something. And when we get to William Penn, you'll find out the 37-foot statue with William Penn. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Okay, so we got to finally go to the National Forefathers Monument in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and got to go see the rock where they landed and get on the Mayflower 2. And
the movie Monumental was.
Yes, the movie Monumental. And I wanted to play a portion of that. And if we do have time, I wanted to play a portion of that. So we might do have a little time. There's just like a 14-minute thing that he explains all the symbolism of it. Did I put it in there? I think I did. Oh, I did. No, so it's part of it. Okay. And then I'll try to make it really big.
There's nothing like bones to remind you of your heritage. That's why I like bringing people up here, because it reminds us of our own mortality. It reminds us that we are in a relay race. We're in a generational relay race. And they understood that.
I wonder if we could do it.
This is Wayne Bradford's grave. That's him. He's the governor for 30 years of the Pilgrim colony, who lost his wife the first winter, who fell off the
is that
back of the
slower? I
house.
did
She's
slower.
the first one that died.
I meant.
You should be 125.
He's one of those that survived the first one. He's one that went on and became their governor and their faithful leader for all this time. And they built this for him many years later. But they did put a Hebrew inscription that says Jehovah is our help. That's from him because he himself taught himself Hebrew to be closer to Moses, closer to the Old Testament, so he'd be closer to God. They had a love for God and a love for their families and a love for freedom that brought them to this world. And William Bradford exemplifies that.
I wish they had left us some kind of a training manual, some kind of a secret sauce recipe card that we can pick up and go, all right, here's what it is, here's what we do. What do we do? How do we get back to that?
Now, when the children of Israel going into the promised land, they crossed the Jordan River, and God stood it on end, and they walked across. And before the waters stopped parting, God told them to take 12 stones from the bottom of the river and put it up at the top of Mount Gilgal and make a monument. So that when your children ask, what are these stones? You'll be able to tell them this is where God parted the sea. And that's what the Pilgrims left us. They left us a monument that not only gives tribute to what was accomplished here, but it gives us a specific strategy, a breakout of a blueprint of if we would ever forget what made America great, what made us free, we can go back and follow that strategy, and it's right up on a hill, a half mile from here.
Right here?
Right here.
just fixed the broken fingers law, and they had a crane there when I was there, but they're fixing it.
Right above where the Plymouth Rock
It's
is.
right, yeah, Plymouth Rock is just right down there.
They don't even tell you
This is
about
on
it.
a mountain.
It's 180 tons of solid granite. It's the largest granite monument in America. It is
81
hidden on a
feet.
hilltop overlooking Plymouth in a residential neighborhood.
I've never heard of this.
Hardly anybody in America knows about it, and yet the people of America put this together over a 70-year period, paid for by the Congress, paid for by the state legislature in Massachusetts, as a strategy laid out called the Matrix of Liberty that was given to us by the forefathers, by the Pilgrims. And they, those 130 years ago, when they built this, wanted to leave this behind for us, so that if we would ever forget how liberty is built,
Wow.
we would know what
Matrix
to
of
do to
Liberty,
regain
how
it.
to create
This is how
liberty.
they did it.
This is how they did it. Now, if somebody else wants to try another way, which is what's happening today in America, we're trying 1,000 ways to turn America around, but this is the way it was done. This is it. The only successful strategy of liberty that has ever been carried out in the history of mankind. Well, let's walk through it. And let's take this strategy apart. What does this mean? What are they trying to tell us here?
So where do you
Well,
start?
her name is Faith. It says so right there.
Wow.
And
The
she
foot is on
pointing
the-
the finger to heaven.
No,
Why?
Plymouth Rock.
For God is.
Where God is, because her faith is in the God of the Bible, in Jesus Christ. They knew that the only faith that could bring true liberty was a faith in the one true God and his Bible. And you see a Bible there, an open Bible. It's a Geneva Bible. The pages are opened up, which meant that they read it. And as they read it, and as they had faith in God, he gave them wisdom. That's why you see the star on her forehead. She's given wisdom to know how to live in this world. And all of the rest of these statues, each one weighing almost 20 tons, is tied to faith. Because without faith, it falls apart. And that's the beginning of it all.
That's what we're teaching tomorrow night on
Where do we go from there?
From here, you need to go to character or morality. And you'll notice
Because that's the internal liberty.
that is the internal liberty, which is the beginning of all freedom. She is called morality. Notice that she has no eyes. That is on purpose because she's looking internal.
She's a
internal
priestess.
character, the transformation of the heart first, and then that brings external transformation. And notice that she has the 10 Commandments in her left hand and the scroll of Revelation in the right. What would that signify?
The Bible.
Exactly. That if you want to have morality, there has to be a standard, and more than that, there has to be an internal transformation. This is speaking of the need to internalize and allow God to change our hearts and our minds first.
Because in England, you had top-down morality imposed on people. Do this, do that. You're moralizing people, but you're saying their morality started in the heart.
In the heart, it had to be changed here. They realized
Inside.
just because you said you were a member of a church, like the Church of England, didn't make you a Christian. And you see this over on the side. The side statues give an explanation of what the meaning of this is for us. That's why we need the evangelists. You see the evangel here writing down the Gospels. And there's a need for evangelists. Why? Because we need to have the gospel of the great liberating gospel of Christ that says he came to set us free. First.
So this is completely contrary to the way the rest of the world had done it up to this point. The pilgrims are saying that morality starts internally with the gospel. The evangelist has to preach the message that transforms the hearts, and then you want to do what's right, rather than being forced to do what's right from the king who tells you what good and bad is.
That's it.
Okay, what's next?
What's next is, and you see the development of it, if you want to have a free civilization, you need to have civil authority or civil law that will give a base for that freedom. In other words, you've got to have some degree of order in society. And that order, as you see here, is built upon law. The principles of God's law then are related into the civil law. And that's what we see here in his left hand. You also see his hand, his right hand is extended in mercy. Mercy toward those that he's dealing justice with. Why? Because this form of law has a degree of equity in it. You see this in the side statue where yeah. Justice.
Lady Justice.
She's holding the scales of justice with justice and equity, which means that, you know, when a crime is committed, it should be cared for in terms of its punishment. The same for the rich and for the poor and for everyone else. There should be equality under the law. On the other side, we notice that this form of law is different than the laws of so many nations that are built on tyrants, that are built on, if the Aztecs wanted to cut your heart out, they just cut your heart out. Here, mercy. Mercy built upon the base that he offers us, mercy and grace, along with law. And in this form of law, there is that tremendous mercy.
So you have to start with faith. Faith in the true God, that produces the internal morality of the heart. You have a standard by which to judge what good and bad is, and then you create a moral system of law to have a basis for a free and just society. that can mete out justice when crimes are committed, but also extend mercy to people and show them grace.
And then that gives you the freedom. Once you have a society that's built like this, now you have a civility in society. Now you can educate your children. Here, they could train them. And you see the lady here in the statue of education. And she is opening the Word of God or the Book of Knowledge. And she has got the wreath of victory she's wearing, about a 25-year-old woman. She is educating her children. And she is sitting in victory. Why is she sitting in victory? Because she has trained her children up in the way they should go. And prepared them so that the next generation that came after them would know the strategy of how to carry on the truth and carry on a free civilization. Isn't that amazing?
And what's on her side over here?
Over here, you see her training her child. And she has a book in her one hand, and then he has a scroll where he is writing on the other. And this is youth, trained in their youth. It was the parents' responsibility. This would be the mother training up a child in the way he should go.
You know what I think is interesting is that they had just left England and left this top-down government system. So when they got here, their idea of education wasn't send your kids off to a government school to educate them. It was the parents' responsibility to do this, particularly because their worldview was different than the government's worldview, which would have been, no, you're nobody, you're a slave, you just lay down your back and do whatever the king says, which is sort of the attitude that we get in most governments today, that you just do whatever the government says, whereas they're saying, no, it's our responsibility as parents to educate our kids and to teach them faith and internal morality and to understand the importance of fair, just, and merciful laws.
And it's passed down from generation to generation. And if you see on the other side, you'll see how the grandfathers played a role. For it's not just the father. Of course, the father and the mother are the key educators. But the key is the hoary heads. Those are the older ones who also have a role. Because you see the guy with the beard here, he's the old guy. And what do you see his left hand pointing to?
There's a book, and it looks like we got the Ten Commandments again.
10 Commandments and an open Bible. Okay? And so he, being older and wiser, he knows the commandments, he knows the Word of God, and then he is pointing to that. And then on the other side, what do you see of it?
That's the world.
The world, right. So he is teaching the younger generation, both his daughter and his grandchildren, how the world works from a biblical perspective. And all of this leads to something, Kirk, and that's, you see the strategy building, from the internal to the external, to the law, to education, to pass it on to the next generation. And what are they passing on? They're passing on liberty. And this is what is the result of living out that strategy. And his name is liberty.
So beautiful.
Liberty is amazing. Look at liberty. There's so much symbols on him.
We call him Liberty Man.
Look at this guy, he's a
Liberty
stud.
Hero. Now this guy is not a guy you want to mess with, right? And he's seated in liberty.
Okay, explain who this guy is. Liberty Man.
Liberty Man, or the liberty hero that he represents, is the fruit. He is the result of obeying the matrix of liberty that you see on this monument. And he is seated in liberty. Now I want you to be careful to notice these details. Notice that he's holding broken chains in his left hand. Notice that he has, where the chains were, bound to his legs. Notice that he is now seated in liberty. He's got that good look on his face like, listen, I'm free, but I'm looking out, defending my liberty, but I'm free. And notice the claw that is on his right shoulder. That claw relates to a skin that goes around to the left here, and you see a lion's head, an entire lion skin. That ultimately represented the lion of the English tyrant back in those days.
So he has slain the lion.
He's slain the lion, and that's what it says here on the left. Tyranny is defeated, and you see Liberty Man standing over tyranny with his foot on the chest of tyranny. He's holding tyranny down. And again, the
That's what the
Pilgrims won
Constitution
this
is supposed
victory
to do.
without violence of any kind, except living out God's principles.
You know, one of the things that's striking me is the fact that this is talking about our forefathers, the Pilgrims, but this guy is not some wimpish little religious guy. I mean, this guy is a stud, right?
Yeah.
He's strong. He's looking out. He has just defeated a beast, and he's got a sword in his hand.
That's right.
And he's here to protect, right?
That's right.
He's here to protect his family and to defend the laws that they have made, and ultimately to defend their values and their character, their faith.
Exactly, exactly. And it shows you that if you do it right, you can be strong as an individual, you can defend liberty, and if need be, you can fight. You don't want to fight, but if you have to, you're ready. But the point is, because you've done it God's way, there is a long-term blessing that goes with it.
This is awesome.
This is it. This is it. So
Peace
Kirk, this
and
is
prosperity.
that recipe. This is that strategy, that matrix that was what built America. This is it. And if we want to try something else, yeah, people can try other things. But in the history of the world, the one strategy that has brought more liberty, more prosperity, and more joy than any other is this strategy. Why would you go anywhere else?
Isn't that amazing?
It's so good.
So he did on his helmet have a sun. So
Yeah, I
capture the
saw
sun.
that.
Yeah.
Capture the sunshine.
So let's see. How do I go back? How do I go back down here? Let's see. Does that make it smaller? No. Okay. That's not what I want.
Just use this scroll bar.
Do what? I don't know where I have too many things open.
My dear brothers and sisters,
Oh, gosh.
how grateful I am for this marvelous,
Okay. How
for
did
the
I get on
marvelous
there?
messages of this conference,
Okay.
and for my privilege
Wrong
to
one.
speak with you now.
You've got too many windows
I
open.
know, I got too
For
many windows
the
open.
more than
Okay, where is
36
that? So I
years
just have to-
I've been an apostle.
Okay.
The doctrine of the gathering
I
of
gotta stop
Israel
something.
has captured my attention.
Okay. Where is it?
Everything about it has
You
intrigued
guys,
me,
where would it be?
Well, look across
including
all
the
your open
ministries
windows.
and names of
I
Abraham,
signed.
Isaac, and Jacob, their lives and their wives, the covenant God made with them and extended through their lineage,
It's right there.
the
Where?
dispersion of
It's like,
I muted it.
Oh.
yeah, right there.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I know how to use technology so well. At least I'm trying, right? Okay. So
There you go.
It was really amazing to go see and be and feel, and it was on a mound. I wonder what native tribes were there, because there was the Massasat. Is that how you call it?
The one up at the Capitol,
Yeah.
that Indian,
Yeah.
is a sculpture that is there.
That's the
And it
same
was
as
done
here.
by Dallin, he's a Utah artist down in Springville.
Yeah.
But, and so I'm looking at the, what is it, Plymouth Rock,
Yeah.
and then up on the hill, I'm seeing this Indian that I've seen in Utah, I'm like, what? And then I go up to the freedom thing, and I'm like, isn't that interesting, our connection? But when you're down and looking at the Plymouth, and they're talking to the
You
people,
can't see it.
nobody says anything about this.
To
It's-
go up there and look
They,
at that.
they never mention freedom of religion,
No.
they never mention anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
Yeah.
we're in mourning over the tribes that were, displaced or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really incredible.
Neither
So
place can
notice that she has.
and they're
They
like-
keep 'em
She has a nest on her head right
Drive up
now,
and
and
down
has for
Tether.
years. So I wonder if it's an eagle, because she has a nest on her head now.
She
Every
does?
year. Yeah.
See?
So in the book it says faith, because and the star is the Magi star, to follow Jesus, to follow.
He
So
was called the Star of the Morning.
the star of the morning. Oh, so there we have the morning sun on his helmet. So that all goes with that. Okay. So what's missing today? Our way of government is the best the world has ever seen, and here we have the Liberty Statute, the Liberty Man, and will require our diligence. We have to pull those weeds and understanding and then maintaining it. That's why we have to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ at the same time as the gospel of liberty.
And it's the human secularism, right? That
Yeah.
they've eliminated God, therefore they've
Yeah.
pulled the rug
Yeah.
out from under your
Yeah.
morality and all this
So once they
teaching.
did that, then now they're trying to demoralize the men and not let them be the liberty men and not, protect, right? And they're just making it this big imbalance. So the belief that freedom is so rare a gift that only a moral and religious people can hold on to it is what they believe. And our nation was raised up by the hand of divine providence, and we need to teach our kids that means God, and that our rights come from Him. Our rights come from God, not government. President Trump has said that several times in his rallies. He brings that point up. He's using these principles, and he understands these principles. So we got to go on the Mayflower too, and hear all the stories and see how they navigated and where they slept, and it's interesting because
Isn't it you and the little animal?
which one?
Blue?
I'm the blue. Lena's the other.
So wrapped up.
Yeah, we were the whole trip I just brought these. The bus took us to a Walmart and I got warm things because I was freezing. And so that's the Plymouth Rock right there. And then that's the Mayflower just right next to it. And so if you bring your kids there, what we didn't get to do that Jelena always gets to do, and she's done this for her Thanksgiving, is there's Leo with this little museum across the street that will give you a whole tour. And you can hire him to talk about the statue with your family. But we didn't get that. And then we showed this video on the tour. And then there's a Plymouth village, a reenactment village, but we didn't get to go do that because we were hitting too many things. That it was like, here's a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. And I'm like, oh, we don't get to go in the Library of Congress and see the rare Book of Mormon that was checked out by Abraham Lincoln. You know, I'm like, we're doing a Book of Mormon National Sacred Covenant tour. Wouldn't we get to do that? You know, but
You probably
and
don't
I found
even
out
realize
that the
it.
Library of Congress was closed on Monday, so that's why
Oh.
we couldn't do it. So if they had just tweaked their schedule and found out when you're making things, but so this is God's majesty. Okay. All right. So when we look at this beautiful sunset, how could a person be an atheist after beholding the majesty of the setting sun on the horizon? Or the sunrise even as well, right? Our children can see this beauty because we can point it out to them and testify to them of God's majesty in creation. That word testify, the only way that Holy Ghost can work is if we do open our mouths and testify. And so like Lone Peak does this originations tour where they do all the, they go back and do all of the church history stuff, and they have those kids, no phone, they're not allowed. They have to read the Book of Mormon the whole way through, finish in the Sacred Grove. They're given talks, they testify at every location, and so it's a much more spiritual trip if you all have a turn to talk about and share testimony of Jesus Christ in these sacred, holy places and spaces. And so mothers will be the ones who will help our children see what so many do not, or grandmothers. And then grandfathers, if they have time, or fathers, if they're able to, right, they can point it out as well. So that's why we decided to make it not just be moms, but be families for liberty, because it is a title of liberty that our men, our Captain Moroni was Captain Liberty Man, and he said even if there's just a small band of Christians, we will still raise the standard, and that standard was raised everywhere in all these towers. Remember when I was in where King Herod was, and it was the last stand of the Jews that were on the top of that mountain? Masada, yeah. And I'm reading, and again another 37. There's 37 towers! So I wonder if there was 37 towers, and that fort, ancient, because it was a giant on the top of this mountain, it was flattened, and it looked like a fort where you would go for, when you read the Book of Mormon, a place of refuge. It wouldn't be where you lived, it would be a place of just to gather all your animals and yourselves and get up there in a place of refuge and defend from these towers. So he had that title of liberty, up on all of these towers. So we need to cover our walls with great art that inspires souls instead of paintings that match the couch. And we see that everywhere here in this beautiful home, that artwork that inspires and testifies of Jesus Christ. The mother who shares from her own heart these beautiful words and paintings from the finest literature instead of empty words written to merely entertain. The mother who helps her child feel the stories and wonders of nature as she takes the child by that hand to explore God's handiwork. Every effort to connect our children and grandchildren to beauty will be some of the most important gardening we will do. And think in yourself what you've done as a grandmother or mother to do that. And if we haven't been doing it, we can change. We can take artwork and take it out. And like when, things that inspire. So, oops, I went too far. Okay, so liberty principle number 9 is to protect man's rights. God has revealed certain principles of divine law. That is the law that he was talking about that has mercy and justice under a sovereignty that we get our rights from God, not government. And so we have to have divine law, and that's why they studied the Mosaic law. So truly the greatest acts of patriotism a mother and father can perform will be in the walls of our own home. And so this is where patriotism comes from. It comes from seeing examples on the home front where we can decorate on patriotic occasions, which is what we can do. Right now we're trying to change the culture. I know there's some families put up the proclamation outside. They have flags of that instead of a month long of pride. We need a month long of veteran stuff. The beautiful thing that we saw from going from 12 states in the District of Columbia is that all their lights had a picture of a veteran, like a flag of a veteran, a flag of a veteran. There were veteran stories everywhere. I felt so beautiful. And then I just saw, I haven't been to Target forever because I hated that they were pushing tranny stuff. But guess what? They're no longer in Target. It's just America stuff. If you go there, you can buy America stuff now in Target. So we see we're slowly winning some wars because we used our wallet and our and spoke out
Our
against
voice.
it. Our voice. So the children can feel it if we're, and if we see that we're placing our hands over our heart with the flag and celebrating the 4th of July. In here in Utah, we get to kind of celebrate twice with the 24th of July. But go and visit for the 24th of July, the Pioneer Village, and tell the stories of the sacrifices of their faith for coming here. And try to go, recently, Robin and I went downtown to the Utah Pioneer Museum, the Daughters of Utah Pioneer Museum, and got to, see some beautiful things there. And it's something that we should do, that the school groups get to go and do, and you can go see the history.
There's two organizations. One of them is the Mormon Battalion organization, and then there's the National Mormon Trails Association.
Yeah.
And I've just become involved in helping with their website. So
Oh, that's nice.
I'm learning all this stuff, and there's so much information about each one of these soldiers that traveled this whole trail. And then Charlotte and I went backwards through the Mormon Trail out to Nauvoo and all there.
Yeah.
And it's all based on faith and all of these things that are teaching virtues and
that's awesome.
Religious liberty and all of those
bring
things.
that.
That's great.
Share it.
So that's why
trip.
we're encouraging you guys to well, you guys already do it for 16 years. But if we can try to get our kids and our grandchildren to understand these and then share it with other people. So if you want to share our website, familiesforliberty.net, for people that don't live, I have people from California now watching, and people from the East Coast, from Virginia, and so that we can teach these liberty principles and these stories. So the reason why I put Abraham Lincoln there was, okay, so this is slide number 19. I can't get all my stuff done in there. So it says that we need to tell our stories again from our heart why we love America. And the founders were great studiers of divine laws contained in the Holy Writ. And they lived and spoke of the gospel of Jesus Christ. George Washington wrote of God over 60 times in his communications during the Revolutionary War. Benjamin Franklin lived by 13 virtues. 13 means mercy, love, and forgiveness. And he broke it down with 13-month calendar, with a moon calendar, and then he would do a quarter and a quarter and a quarter, and he'd work on those, kind of like my idea of working on an affirmation. We could work on his 13 virtues, and he even wrote a book on his 13 virtues. And Thomas Jefferson would cut out passages from the Bible, just of the words of Christ, and he would carry them in his front pocket. So you can go to the Museum of the Library and buy a replica of that. I had bought one, and I don't know where it is right now, but it was different languages he did too. So people are like, oh, Thomas Jefferson, they're trying to say he doesn't believe in Christ. Are you kidding? He just didn't believe that there was the church on this earth right now, and he wanted just the words of Jesus himself, because it brought him joy. And he played violin. Remember that? So, which is the vibrational energy of violin. If you've not been around violin, listening to Mary Alice played violin, and my boys all played Suzuki violin. The Bible is simply the greatest gift God has given to mankind. That is what Lincoln said, so that's why I put Lincoln there. And then he checks out the Book of Mormon for 8 months, and then he turns in the Emancipation Proclamation about 8 days later. So I just think it's great. So at the Exodus and Deuteronomy, the Bible is simply the greatest gift he has given to mankind. Our founders pulled from ancient principles from the governance in Genesis, Exodus, and Deuteronomy to institute sound principles embedded in our inspired documents. They knew obedience to God's law would qualify for this new nation for blessings and protection. That's the covenant, right? They knew obedience was the key. We can teach these principles in our homes, which does capture the sunshine and brings it into our home. So you can plan all kinds of fun activities to do that. So one of the first congressional acts after George Washington was sworn in as president on the balcony of the Federal Hall. This is what it used to look like. This
The one on the
balcony
right here.
the red one.
Oh, over there.
Yeah. And so he was on the balcony of the Federal Hall. There was 13 things on the railing, and then you can't see it in the picture. I'm standing next to the railing, and that's where the Bible would have been, but it's out right now, so we couldn't see that it was open to Genesis 49. 4 plus 9 is 13. Genesis 49, starting with verse 22, is the covenant. He placed his hands on the covenant of the stick of Joseph. Joseph's
blessing
seed
of
coming, the
Joseph.
blessing and the covenant, blessing of him to come to this land of promise. The Hebrew way to say promised land is land of promise 37 times in the Book of Mormon. Remember, and the Mosaic Law is 37 times there. There's 37 miracles recorded in the New Testament. That's why God just keeps giving me Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And then the reverse chiasmus of 37 that we find in Genesis 1:1 is 73, and it means Mashiach, or means the title Christ, which means anointed, or the Messiah, right? And so, and also 73 means wisdom. So Jesus is our great wisdom teacher, right? So we need to be like him. So here's our George Washington. This is, so if you go here, so he placed his hands on there, and that was a Masonic that's a Masonic Bible in New York that they took, and he opened it specifically to Genesis 49. If you want to read the trilogy books from Tim Ballard, it's the Hypothesis of George Washington, the Hypothesis of Abraham Lincoln, and then the last book he wrote was about the Pilgrim's Hypothesis, and it has little cue codes where he teaches at locations beautiful stories. His major was history before he started saving children, and so if you walk just literally, it's right there, and just a few blocks away, you see that steeple of this church, and it's St. Paul's Church. And don't be fooled that you can't go in it. You can't go in the front, but you walk around the back. You can see Alexander Hamilton's grave and learn about him, but walk from the back, and there's Hebrew. So this little thing in the center, it has a triangle, and it has the Lord, which is Yod He Vav He, on it, and there's Hebrew everywhere in this little chapel. So, just like you saw in William Bradford's grave, Hebrew. And so, I've done this twice with my daughter to walk in there. And I think that time, accidentally, I was on Marco Polo, and I answered the phone. I'm like, oh, I'm walking to St. Paul's Chapel. Hi, Colette. Yeah. So he attended, as soon as he became president, he attended the service to pray and to live under the divine principles and establish this government and our laws accordingly. And so we're set up as a divine covenant land. So Bible verses where we can learn truths from God's word for biblical citizenship, right? We have civic citizenship in our founding documents that we need to study. So in James 1:17, the Lord tells us every good gift comes from God. James 5:13-15 reminds us if we are afflicted to pray and sing merry psalms. If we sin, we can be forgiven, and the Lord will raise us up. That's why we use the symbolism. Teach your children and grandchildren. If you need talks for your baptisms, I have really good talks on baptism and faith and the gift of the Holy Ghost, where you make a little box with all these little things in, and you tell the child or the grandchild about the symbolism of baptism and the gift of the Holy Ghost. And then Acts 16:23 and 25 tells when Paul and Silas were in jail. They were beaten, and at midnight they prayed and sang songs, and others heard them. Imagine how the melody would have filled that night. And then it fell, the prison opened. And then they were going to kill the jail keeper. I went there last summer and saw his jail in Greece, or Turkey, now it's part of Turkey, but Ephesus. And he didn't want the jail keeper to get in trouble, so he just stayed there. He says, that didn't happen. He didn't let us free. We're still here. So I just thought it was really cool. Okay, so Psalms 100 tells us to make a joyful noise to the Lord and come before him with singing. So some of you might have that tradition on Sundays to listen to the Tabernacle Choir, or to listen to holy music during holidays, Easter, or whatever. We need to remember
Christmas.
to keep these traditions going. To make your own traditions, but keep these traditions going. So Luke 17:11-19, it's a parable of the leper, where God healed, but only one fell on his feet and returned in gratitude. So that's another good one that you can teach at Thanksgiving time, and then you can bring up the story of the first Thanksgiving, and even that. Okay, I just was reading it. Is the Massasoit, I think is his name, Chief Massasoit. He was praying, going, they're dying. Look at them, they're all dying. But they're not coming here to conquer, because they came with women and children. And he's like, should we go talk to them? Well, if we talk to them, they might grow really strong, and then they might kill us. And he was going back and forth, where I finally went, too many are dying. And the majority were the women, 102 passengers, right? And like 40-something lived. And so, and then when I was on the Mayflower, they talked about they weren't going to allow them on the boat to sleep, because the boat Mayflower stayed in dock, and he only had his sailors on there, and they said, get off the boat, start building your stuff. And then they all started dying. Well, the sailors started dying, so then they went out and said, you can come back on. Because they knew the women that were there would help the sailors, would be the nurses. But, you know, they were considered cargo to the Mayflower captain. Okay,
What were they dying from?
just all kinds of diseases that were
okay.
happening. But if you do the story on the Mayflower hypothesis, there's one story where when they came ashore, because they were blown off, right? They came to shore. They looked. There was actual snow on the beach or on the sand, and they could see there was rustling under it, but there was still snow on it. And so they went over there and they dug, and the story is that they took the corn, you know. And John Helen was like, he took the horn and felt so guilty about it. We stole their food, you know. And so when that first Thanksgiving happened, he's like, we're so sorry we took your food. And they're like, well, we kind of put it there. We didn't want you guys to die. You know, we were trying to help you without helping you, but, you know, because we were still scared of who you were, trying to figure it out. So, but he had a conscience. I thought that was really cool. That he had a conscience, like, well, what if this was somebody's food that, you know, and we're eating it, and anyway. So my story about my shirt, Boston Athenaeum Library. So when we get to Boston, I had looked up, and it was such a busy day because we went on a freedom trail where they were telling us stories everywhere, and so I went online, and I thought I could get all of us to come in and see it. And she's like, only one person. It's a locked thing. You are locked in, and what do you want to pull, and what time will you be here? And I'm like, I don't know. So it was God orchestrating the whole thing, because I had to do it in between in order to do during my lunchtime, right? And I had to walk from where the bus dropped us off to the location, get in there, go in there, and they had pulled the Travels of Cyrus, which goes with this, the Travels of Cyrus, and there's his signature when he was young, when his mother gave it to him. So they have all of George Washington's library there. And then Common Sense, both, so now I want to read Common Sense. Has any of you read it? Because both Thomas Jefferson and George Washington owned a copy of Common Sense, and to address to the inhabitants of America. And they use this beautiful book to and look at what are we trying to bring back right now. So I'm feeling that God is telling us to read this book. So that's my next, like, on my to-do list is to read Common Sense, and because and this Travels of Cyrus is a lot easier to this one is a lot easier to read than that one,
which is the really old English.
Because it's such old English. So I'm wondering if there's an easier to read Common Sense. I don't know, but we need to
Glenn
get
Beck wrote a book on Common Sense.
Okay. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So here's Thomas Paine. So author of Common Sense and The American Crisis, which promote American independence. Are we back at The American Crisis?
Yeah.
So maybe God wants us to learn and read this because our founders read it. So it is by understanding.
Trump has been saying common sense.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So we need to get back to this, and we need to testify. When we're talking with the other side, I've used that several times with the other side. So it is by understanding his rights that we get them from God, not government. Trump says that several times. We need to keep testifying that to our children, grandchildren, that he learns his duties. For where the rights of men are equal, every man must fully see the necessity of protecting the rights of others as the most effectual security for his own. Joseph Smith taught that, you know, that was one of his big things too. And so if we do have time, I wanted to read just a little portion of his 8 pages when he was General Smith running for president. Okay, but I do want to quickly bring up The Man's Search for Meaning. My daughter had to read that this year. And has any of you guys read that in the past?
I haven't read it, but I know about it.
So as we read this, we find an even deeper connection between gratitude and having a pure heart and how that impacts our actions. I think we don't, this is what I've learned. When I'm in a trial, if I like when I miscarried my first 3 babies and I got angry and I was like, I live right, I've done this right, I've checked all the boxes, you know, and I was in anger and damnation to God, right? And then one day I was praying and it was like, you need to repent. You need to say, what am I supposed to learn from this trial? And be thankful for the trial. And then God gave me the answer of what to do. So when we have trials, this is what I learned. The faster we say, I'm sorry, what am I supposed to learn from this? And instead of being like I was, and you will receive revelation to know why you had that trial, and you'll get out of it. And it's not like months or years because you're in this angry, prideful state. So anyway, so this is what he's seeing. So he's a Jewish, Viktor Frankl is a Jewish neurologist and psychiatrist who spent 3 years laboring in several different concentration camps. In his book, he observes the behavior of those in the camps and witnessed how differently inmates reacted and responded to their brutal surroundings. Through his own experience and personal discovery, he found that it wasn't pleasure, but purpose. Purpose, we were just talking about that. That's what we need to give to our children and grandchildren, and that's what our church of Jesus Christ gives us, is purpose. We lived before we came to earth as a spirit. We came here and we have purpose to live. What is our purpose now? And as we go through different changes of life, what's our purpose if our kids are gone, right? And then what do we do after we die, right? So he observes those brutal surroundings, and his personal discovery, he found out it wasn't pleasure but purpose that gave meaning to life. Men who lived and suffered in the very same conditions would give up. They would succumb to their worst selves, or in rare occasions would rise above their surroundings. He observed a small group of prisoners in these horrible death camps secretly gathered together to recite poetry, to sing songs, and act in impoverished plays, even though such activities were forbidden and punishable by death. Instinctively, they understood that the soul's weapon in the fight for self-preservation was art and beauty. They would read the Bible too. They brought pages of the Bible. It is DeRuyter, Kitty DeRuyter's book. If you've not read that book, and I have the YouTube of her last talk just recently that she did on it, and it was when the Japanese came in and took over Indonesia, and her dad was a Dutchman and her mom was Indonesian, and she was arrested by the Japanese, and she was a doctor, and they wanted to, so they told her to get all the girls ready to be raped, and she had scissors in her doctor bag. She cut their hair and made them look the ugliest that they could be, and she ripped out pages of the Bible and gave them to all the people too. They dug a hole, put her in naked in the hole, and just said, "You're just gonna die there." Anyway, she didn't die, but it was she was willing to sacrifice everything to save people, and it's a beautiful book. So same thing is that all these beautiful things, you can see beauty. So the jewels of life become so important to them. He noticed that they even skip their meager meals at the end of grueling days of hard labor to allow more time to participate. Beauty is not just what we see outside, but what is actually in our hearts. It becomes our inner compass. Remember, they talked with the statue, we have the inner compass. Who we are. Beauty in music, art, and nature penetrates our souls when we have the spirit of gratitude. We see things differently. We face things differently. So we need to get out of that negative self-talk. Well, I'm so depressed here because of this, or I'd only be happy if it was that, you know. So what are some of the simple things that help you or your family capture gratitude? Sunshine even in trying times. When we reach that place, we can find beauty in everything, no matter how hard the world tries to hide it, and we are filled. President Nelson has told us that, right? There's going to be trying times, but we can still find beauty in any situation. This is the ultimate depth and definition of freedom. It is not the circumstances without, but the determination within that ultimately define who we are and the kind of person we will be. It is our freedom to choose, not necessarily our specific conditions and environment, but how we meet situations. And no one can take that away. Consider the great worth of the mind and the heart stocked full of images of great art, the melodies of inspirational music, the beautiful words of great literature. A well-stocked mind and heart are equipped to find hope in the direct circumstances or situations. Fahrenheit 451, do you guys remember that book in school? I had to teach it as a high school English teacher. And their books were burned, right? So that people memorized things and they would meet and talk. This just reminded me of that. So he said, man is originally characterized by his search for meaning, that's your purpose, rather than his search for himself. The more he forgets himself, this is what the Savior tells us to do, and giving ourselves to a cause or another person, the more human he is, and the more he is immersed and absorbed in something or someone other than himself, the more he really becomes himself. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're really depressed and you go out and serve someone, right? We have Just Serve for just that reason. We can go on and we can look at service opportunities you can do with your children or grandchildren or yourself to brighten your day. So, okay. This is one of my favorites.
Years from now, some of them may look back and ask themselves whether they've made the right choice, whether they've made the most of the opportunities they've been given. Together, we have the same mission. Over the course of your life, you will find that things are not always fair. you will find that things happen to you that you do not deserve and that are not always warranted. But you have to put your head down and fight, fight, fight. Never, ever, ever give up. Don't give in, don't back down, and never stop doing what you know is right. Nothing worth doing ever, ever, ever came easy. And the more righteous your fight, the more opposition that you will face. In your hearts are inscribed the values of service, sacrifice, and devotion. Now you must go forth into the world and turn your hopes and dreams into action. America has always been the land of dreams because America is a nation of true believers. When the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, they prayed. When the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence, they invoked our Creator 4 times. Because in America, we don't worship government, we worship God. It is why our currency proudly declares, "In God we trust." And it's why we proudly proclaim that we are one nation under God. The story of America is the story of an adventure that began with deep faith, big dreams, and humble beginnings. The next generation of American leaders never, ever give up. There'll be times in your life you'll want to quit. Never quit. Never stop fighting for what you believe in and for the people who care about you. Carry yourself with dignity and pride. Demand the best from yourself. The more people tell you it's not possible, that it can't be done, the more you should be absolutely determined to prove them wrong. Treat the word impossible as nothing more than motivation. Relish the opportunity to be an outsider. The more that a broken system tells you that you're wrong, the more certain you should be that you must keep pushing ahead. You must keep pushing forward. And always have the courage to be yourself. America is better when people put their faith into action. Pray to God and follow His teachings. Today, each of you begins a new chapter as well. When your story goes from here, it will be defined by your vision, your perseverance, and your grit. You will build a future where we have the courage to chase our dreams no matter what the cynics and the doubters have to say. You will have the confidence to speak the hopes in your hearts and to express the love that stirs your souls. As long as you have pride in your beliefs, courage in your convictions, and faith in God, then you will not fail. As long as America remains true to its values, loyal to its citizens, and devoted to its Creator, then our best days are yet to come. The class of 2017. May God bless the United States of America. And I just want to let you know that God blesses you. And I want to just say, you are special in every way. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So you can still find it.
He said fight before he got
Yeah,
shot.
that was before he got shot. So he,
Interesting.
and then he was like a bulletproof George Washington. So the media just hides who this man is and what he believes. So when I'm down, I literally on YouTube always try to find that
Because it's so
speech, 'cause it
uplifting.
helps
I just
myself.
found it. It's like 6
Yeah,
minutes
so
long.
it helps myself when I feel like, well, we should quit. We should just quit. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go listen and never ever give up. Because we need to not do that. So Alexander Hamilton says there is a certain enthusiasm in liberty that makes human nature rise above itself in acts of bravery and heroism. That's what Trump has done, right? And I learned a little bit more on this trip about Alexander Hamilton and how he had bravery because George Washington was always by his side. But as soon as that duel happened and the duel happened, it was George Washington had died. So he didn't have the wise older man that helped him when he got into some things.
He also had a moral falling.
Yeah, he did.
And that, it's so interesting, like he does come back a little bit from that.
Yeah.
But it's his wife who keeps all of his records.
Yeah.
And really, she was the one that was cheated on, right? And then
Yeah.
she makes him great, because if we didn't have all of his records, we wouldn't have appreciated really the
Yeah.
great man he was.
Yeah, that he tried, but we are all human. Yeah. So this really quickly, this is the American Constitution is, so far as I see, the most wonderful work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man, and that's by William Gladstone. And so just about James Madison, I could not find a little card that says the virtue of commitment, but reliability was the closest one that I could find. And I wanted to remind you that there were 56 signers, 27 injuries. So this book, this is the newest book that Chris Kimball introduced me to that I just got an email. It's 28 injuries, which they took, So there's 28 injuries, and the 28th is slavery. And so we didn't get rid of that, but Thomas Jefferson did try. And they said, well, in 20 years we'll get rid of it. And Thomas Jefferson, 2 years before, it was 1808 when that was gonna happen, he tried to get the military to stop the pirating, to stop the slaves from coming over and everything, and then there was a big coup. So, but there was originally 28 injuries, but they mutually pledged each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And remember, it took 17 days for them to write, and then it took 17 weeks at the Constitutional Convention. And here is the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And there's the new 5,000-year leap for children that they're going to talk about. There's actions and words you can teach for your children to memorize that. I just wanted to read a few of James Madison. He's called the father of the Constitution. He says, it's impossible to consider this decree that ultimately this was a miracle. And then he said, the real wonder is that so many difficulties should have been surmounted in the Federal Convention, and surmounted with a unanimity almost as unprecedented as it must have been unexpected. It is impossible for a man of candor to reflect on this circumstance without partaking of astonishment. It is impossible for the man of poised reflection not to perceive it the finger of that almighty hand which has been so frequently and signally extended to our relief in this critical stages of the revolution. A happy union of these states is a wonder. Their constitution is a miracle, the example of hope and liberty throughout the world. Woe to the ambition that would meditate the destruction of either, which is what's happening. Whatever may be the judgmental pronounced on the competency of the architects of the Constitution, or whatever may be the destiny of the edifice prepared by them, I feel it a duty to express my profound and solemn conviction that there never was an assembly of men charged with a great and arduous trust, who were more pure in their motives and more exclusively or anxiously devoted to the object committed to them than were the members of the Federal Convention of 1787, to the object of devising and proposing a constitutional system which should best secure the permanent liberty and happiness of our country. And so we should all love that. And then this virtue of reliability means that you're dependable, you'll show up. So he had prepared himself. James Madison had read all of these ancient documents, the Bible, and then he talked with Thomas Jefferson. The person who was like over the whole convention was George Washington. And we had John Hancock was the recorder. And so we, when we practice a virtue of reliability or commitment, we choose our commitments wisely. Others can depend on us, and we take responsibility, and we're consistent in giving our best. And I think it's interesting, Melania calls her little thing, be best, right? So we should do our best. That's a type of commitment that these founders had. And I only want to show a little bit of that, and then that's the end. So I'm going to stop this before it's all the way done. But I was so impressed by William Penn. And I wanted to understand why they would put a 37-foot William Penn in Pennsylvania on this tower, and wanted to understand more about who he was. And it was the precursor of the Constitution, was the Constitution of Pennsylvania, and how he became a Quaker. And whoops, okay, so we'll only watch a little bit of it, and then I'll stop it. So. We 1.5, is that too much?
No. 1.5 or 1.25?
1.5 I did. Is that too much?
I don't know. We'll see.
No, 1.25.
September 1682. William Penn, proprietor of the new colony of Pennsylvania, is making his first trip to America. Under the charter granted by the King of England,
That's
Penn has
fast.
the right to almost total sovereignty over his colony.
Can't
But
understand
he's
it.
chosen to begin a
Way
bold
too fast,
experiment in
sorry.
democratic government and religious freedom. An experiment that will help to shape American
That's better.
ideals
Okay,
for
thanks.
many years.
Oops, we're not using those. These are just my extra ones of the band. Sorry. These are ones that I didn't get off. It's this one. Oh, dang. Okay. So I have to go back. Okay.
September 1682. William Penn, proprietor of the new colony of Pennsylvania, is making his first trip to America. Under the charter granted by the King of England, Penn has the right to almost total sovereignty over his colony. But he's chosen to begin a bold experiment in democratic government and religious freedom, an experiment that will help to shape American ideals for many years to come. To understand the beginnings of Penn's bold experiment, we must go back 15 years, to 1667. In England, as in most of Western Europe, government is closely related to religion, and Parliament has passed a law requiring all religious worship to follow the ceremonies of the official state church. This law has effect not only in England, but also in Ireland, which is ruled by England. In 1667, William Penn, who was an Englishman by birth, is living temporarily in Ireland, managing the estates owned by his father. September 3rd, 1667, in the Irish town of Cork. A meeting of a small religious group called the Society of Friends, also known as Quakers. Quaker meetings are held at night and in secret. Discovery would mean arrest and imprisonment, because Quakers reject the authority of the official state church and refuse to follow its ceremonies. They believe that everyone possesses an inner light that can direct the soul to God without the help of ministers or priests or ritual worship. Among the worshippers at this meeting is a young man whose clothes and bearing mark him as an aristocrat. William Penn is the son of an admiral in the Royal Navy and a personal friend of the king. Now 23 years old, he has attended several Quaker meetings, sitting with the others in silent meditation, and listening to an occasional speaker who rises at the prompting of the inner light to quote a passage of scripture or share an inspirational thought.
Almost like a fast
But this particular meeting is to become a turning point for William Penn and for the Quaker movement. By accident, the meeting has been discovered by a soldier of the king. William Penn reacts not as a Quaker, but as an aristocrat insulted by a member of the lower classes. The Quaker movement opposes any form of physical violence, and Penn's outburst only proves that he's not yet a true Quaker. Later, the soldier will return with reinforcements. Penn and 18 others will be arrested, tried, and put in jail for their Quaker beliefs. After a few days, Penn is free again, but the experience has helped to change the course of his life. He's a skilled writer, and he studied law and theology. Now he's determined to use all his resources to help the Quaker movement. His writings and other activities as a Quaker will bring him into conflict with the Church of England and the royal government. More than once, he'll spend time in prison. But Penn will use his knowledge of the law to defend the Quaker movement in court. Traveling to various parts of England and also to Holland and Germany, Penn preaches the doctrines of his Quaker faith. In Holland, Quakers and other religious groups are free to practice their faith without fear of persecution. William Penn is greatly impressed by the spirit of religious freedom that is found in Holland, and by the year 1680, a bold plan has begun to take shape in his mind. In the lands claimed by England in North America, it might be possible to establish a new colony where Quakers and others might find freedom from religious persecution. There are already several settlements in North America. Virginia, established in 1607, has grown and become prosperous by 1680. And the colonies farther north are also thriving. In New England especially, but in other colonies as well, there are strict laws governing the practice of religion. New England Puritans have often persecuted the few Quakers who have settled in the northern colonies. And yet, by the year 1680, the Quakers have begun to secure a small foothold in the New World. The titles to the New Jersey colonies have been sold by the original owners to a group of Quakers, including William Penn. New Jersey already has a settled population, but northwest of New Jersey is a large area with very few inhabitants. Here, a new colony could be established for those who suffer from religious persecution in Europe. Penn's father, who died 10 years earlier, had loaned a large sum of money to King Charles. As payment for that debt, Penn has decided to request a royal charter for a new colony in America. If he had asked the king for money, the debt would probably never have been repaid. But Penn's request for land offers King Charles a way to rid England of the troublesome Quakers, and at least partly for that reason, he grants a much larger area than Penn had asked for. The name chosen by Penn for his new province was Sylvania, which means woodland, but King Charles changes the name to Pennsylvania in honor of Penn's father. Penn plans to remain in England temporarily to prepare a form of government for his colony and recruit new settlers. Meanwhile, he commissions his cousin, William Markham, to go to Pennsylvania as deputy governor. One of Markham's responsibilities when he arrives in America is to select the location for Pennsylvania's principal city and capital, to be called Philadelphia. Eventually, a site will be chosen near the junction of the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers. The city to be built here will be carefully planned to ensure the health and safety of its people. Penn wants to avoid the crowded and dangerous conditions typical of the cities of Europe. He remembers the Great Plague of London in 1665 that claimed the lives of 70,000 people, and the Great Fire that nearly destroyed London in 1666. Penn's instructions to Markham are also concerned with European settlers already living in a few small communities along the Delaware River, a total of about 1,000 people, including Swedes, Dutch, and English. By royal charter, William Penn has almost unlimited authority over these people. To assure them of his good intentions, he has written a letter and instructed Markham to read it to them. My friends, I hope you will not be troubled with your change. You shall be governed by laws of your own making and live a free people. I shall not usurp the right of any or oppress his person. God has furnished me with a better resolution.
Isn't that cool?
Another letter from William Penn is addressed to the Indians of Pennsylvania.
So I wanted to make sure
I am
we
very
included
sensible of the unkindness and injustice that hath been too much exercised toward you. But I am not such a man. I desire to win your love and friendship by a kind, just, and peaceable life. I shall shortly come to you myself, at which time we may more largely and freely confer these matters. I am your loving friend, William Penn. In October 1682, a year and a half after receiving his charter, William Penn arrives in America for the first time. He has several meetings with the Indians, as represented in this famous, although somewhat inaccurate painting. Penn demonstrates his respect for the Indians by learning their language and paying them a fair price for their land. The Indians and the European settlers of Pennsylvania will remain at peace for 100 years to come. By the time of Penn's arrival, work on the city of Philadelphia has already begun. Thomas Holme, the Surveyor General, has prepared a detailed plan for the city.
So I just wanted at least that much of it, just to show you that his religion that he adopted was to, and that God set it up, that he would be able to have this place of Pennsylvania, where the birthplace where all of them came together with different religions to do the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was in Philadelphia. And that he wouldn't have, if he wasn't an aristocrat, that converted, you know, God just like sets this all up. And as we were driving away on the bus, I was like, what's that giant statue over there? You know?
That was William Penn.
William Penn, 37 feet tall.
Wow.
And so I just was like, oh, I gotta study more. So it's exciting when you start to go, I need to study the gospel of liberty at the same time as the gospel of Jesus
This is
Christ.
what our children are supposed to be learning.
Yes, yes.
And they're not.
So if you want my slideshow, you can always have my slideshows. You can
Well, send it
always
to me
do
and I'll send it out on Monday.
Okay, and then we just always end with the 4 ways to stay anchored in hope, which is look to God, not government, prioritize your family time. And oh, I did want to say, there is a quote in here about, I did want to read that quote with George Washington because it was so, so good about a standard of liberty. Okay, it's back in there. Oh, I don't know where it was now. So I didn't mark it. So George Washington said we needed a standard of liberty. And then we used the standard of liberty. Our prophets say that. The Book of Mormon says a standard of liberty. And so we need to teach why we have this Constitution. Now in Doctrine and Covenants, we're learning about the Constitution and how it will be used even during the millennium, right? So we study that Constitution from the viewpoint of the Founding Fathers. So we do need to look at those Federalist Papers. I mean, that's the other thing that we probably should put on our, we need to study this year, this 250th anniversary.
They are very difficult.
Yeah. So
Glenn Beck wrote a book.
With the 5,000-year leap, right?
Yeah.
Summarizes it.
Yeah, summarizes it. So that's why the 28 principles, I'll finish all 28 principles by the time the second week before Christmas. And so, and then we'll take a 2-week break. So, and then we ask God how we can be part of the solution. And even if it's just to learn these things so that we can teach our husband or wife or our grandchildren, and then as we come to these beautiful holidays of liberty, that we can say, hey, let's bear our testimony. I encourage you. The only way they can feel the Spirit is if you say, I bear testimony that God is real, that He was in the making of America and this national covenant we have in our land, and bear testimony, and then you'll bring the Spirit in. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Yay.
Thank you, Tami.
Anyway, I never. Well, I always go over. But hey, I did bring this. If you people want to see this, this is an ancient Hopewell. It's got a cross and a snake, and this was in a mound. And this says Jesus, the name of God or people of God. This means the people of God. That thing. If you guys want to.
Is that the nails? Are in the, because it looks like cuneiform, right?
Yeah, it looks like ancient. It's a mix of stuff, right? I mean.
Oh, that one.
And this is my other good book I just started to get, non-LDS, is The Hidden Cities, Discoveries of the Loss of Ancient North American Civilization. He talks a lot about George Washington here being a surveyor and going out and seeing these ancient relics, and he believed that the Indians were smart.
This was in the Hopewell.
That was in Hopewell, yeah. And the other one was Moses. No, that's how Glenn Beck got canned from CNN, because he listened to watched, he saw a relic that has Moses and the 10 Commandments in a box, and he showed it and said, hey, the natives weren't these dumb natives that Powell said. Powell was the one that propagated that they were dumb, they didn't have a written language. They were savages, barbarics. I have got it at the bottom. She's finding more symbolism on this thing.
No, look at this.
Yeah. So so we're having right now, like Nancy said, a systematic destruction of Native American stuff. But we can see that he visited everywhere. So if you go over on a cruise to Santa Maria, it's in Mexico, Saint Maria. It's called the Huatulco. It's called the Place of the Cross. They just uncovered. So in 2019, I went at Christmas time for my son's mission, and they just found all this stuff that looks like it's another temple site, and they believe Jesus. This Jesus came in Mexico. So I believe Jesus walked everywhere, north, south, middle America. So yeah, so I would look at some of those. None of you got to do that.
Did you say kitty divider or the?
Yes.
What was the
Well,
name?
KITTY.
Okay.
We can do this video. It just popped up again because I saved it.
And they'll say, you take this section, you take this, you take this. You study and read it, you understand.
That's what Natalie said. Remember, she said that they tried to change her bill. How they always have people go and make changes. So at every milestone, pinpoint there.
Her son married my good friend. Yeah. So I got that for his hair. Just watching